Hey, buddy, how you doing?
Mr. Barklow, how you doing, my friend?
Good. How are you?
Good, man. It's been a very roller coaster of a hunting day. I was in line for the leftover tag sale for Idaho this morning and was unsuccessful. So I was like, bit up, bit down, but it's all right. We're back. We leave for elk on Monday, so it's trending in the right direction.
Yeah. Well, good for you. I refuse to play Idaho's game. It's a shit show, and I don't want to be a part of it.
I
It's
I
uh,
don't blame you, man.
it's insane, man. I mean, it's gotten worse and worse and worse. It's nuts.
Yeah.
So, but luckily, I live in Montana, so I don't have to play their game.
I feel pretty blessed in BC too, but I still like to hop over the border every now and
Oh
then and,
yeah,
and
no,
come
for
play
sure.
south.
Yeah. So, where are you going hunting, elk hunting next
I'm
week?
going up to the Peace. So this is kind of I'm trying to think of what would be like a good analogous area. And I don't even really know if there is an analogous area down south. It's a flatter area. It
Hmm.
is one of our only areas where there is a fairly large uh non 3 point non 6 point limit. So the vast majority, we have like a handful of limited draw tags that you can pull, but really the whole province is kind of like 6 point and up. Um, that's our version of wildlife management for elk in British Columbia. We don't do limited tags. We don't do any type of draw system. We just say you can't kill anything unless it's over 6 points, which I have, several bones of contention with that I've talked about. But the piece, I think because there's a lot of mixed ag up there, so there's probably a lot of property damage that gets done. There's a very healthy elk population. They have a 3 point limit. I don't know the exact dates, but it's basically the entirety and it's a rifle season. I'm going to be taking my bow, which a lot of people here think is ridiculous. And I'm going to take heat for this. I think hunting elk with a rifle in the rut is ridiculous. So maybe I'm the crazy one. I don't know. But yeah, there's a 3 point limit and it's a lot of thick timber. It's a lot of like pretty flat country. As you get out of that area, it kind of breaks up into more mountainous stuff. But the trick is what makes it difficult is there's a lot of road access. I've finally entered the quad owners club this year. So I think that's going to I went up there last year thinking if I'm willing to out hike everybody, I can win this game. And what I realized is I'm getting down like 1 to 2 deactivated roads that are maybe 5-6 kilometers per day. Like that's just the physical limit of what I'm capable of. And they're bombing down 6 or 7 or 8 of them, throwing bugles off the end. And if they hear something, they go down and play. And if they don't, they go on to the next one. And I realized I just can't compete on foot like this. So I took one last year with my bow. I'm pretty confident. I'm going in solo this year. I had my dad and my brother with me for the first half of last year, and that was kind of limiting just with their physical fitness and where they were able to go. So I kind of found some like really gnarly spots last year that I could hear bulls calling from, but I couldn't get in there. And that's like my plan A attack this year. Because there's so much quad access, I kind of found it similar in New Mexico, actually. Nobody really goes in the crappy parts because you can do pretty well if you just stick in your side by side and stay on the deactivated roads, that there's really not that much competition in the gnarly parts.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I heard you've had an eventful hunting season from what I've heard from people. Your sheep hunt? Was it your sheep hunt?
Yeah, I did. I that was the first time I've gone to chase sheep with the bow, and it's going to be hard to not just keep doing that forever because I got sub 100 twice. It's hard to say what you really call an opportunity or not. Like, would I say it was like a grade A opportunity? No, I didn't come to full draw. It kind of happened fast. And you know what it's like in your mind, it's like, oh, I wish that hadn't happened so fast. Maybe I could have done something with those opportunities. But considering I have seen very minimal sheep, and I saw no sheep the previous year when I went solo, to the point where this year I saw hundreds of sheep, several mature rams, like several rams I would have been proud, very proud to take home and to get within that kind of distance. And it was a really big, I think I learned more about sheep hunting on this one hunt than I have on all my other previous hunts. And it was kind of funny. It was like the tale of two hunts. The first half, the weather was beautiful, the sheep were everywhere, and there was no people. And you kind of get a little complacent. You're like, oh, we're in Valhalla. Like, this is going on forever, man. We can just do whatever we want. And then the second half, storms blew in, sheep took off, people came in, and it was just like, oh, okay, well, spent the next 6 days kind of chasing our tails. But it was a blast, man. I had a really good time. And it was one of those ones, I think you and I share similar perspectives on failure in that it's something that should be embraced and not run away from.
Yeah.
I'm normally pretty firm that when I come home empty-handed, I'm okay taking the L. It is what it is. Didn't feel like it this year. I didn't have that pit in my stomach of depression. I didn't have that sense of remorse and regret. Like, I legitimately had a smile on my face. I was like, okay, there's not a dead sheep on the ground, but yeah. I'm a better sheep hunter, and I'm one step closer than I was last year for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, that's about all you can ask for, really.
Yeah.
And you control that.
Right. Yeah, it was pretty awesome, man. What's gone on for you so far this year? When are you going out?
Probably, well, little after the middle of the month, just with work and some family commitments and some things like that. I'm not very happy about it right now. I mean, I'm happy to talk to you. I'm just not happy to talk to you in September, to be honest with you.
I was surprised I got you on, man. I'm going to be honest.
It normally wouldn't happen, but it is happening this year. The beautiful thing about Montana is that it's a 6-week archery season.
Right.
So I'm going to enter the elk woods at what I think to be the beginning of what should be the rut.
Yeah.
It's the best moon phase. It's the best dates. And I get to hunt, even though I'm starting, quote, 2 weeks late, I will get to hunt 1 month until the end of middle of October if I want to or need to. And I've had some great elk hunting action in, the first week of October. So, so I'm just trying to like take it as a opportunity to train a little more and pack and repack and, some things like that. So, I got burned out. I really got burned out a lot last year, early season, Labor Day out there, 100 some degrees. I don't know, second, third day, something like that. I killed the velvet mule deer, but the elk was brutal just with the heat and all that. So you start grinding yourself down and, reducing that volume of resources that you built up all year in the first 10 days and kind of piss it away.
Mm-hmm.
And then, when it's time to really get ramped up, I wasn't operating on all cylinders. So, this year I'm kind of forced into it, but I actually think it's going to work out really well.
That's an interesting perspective, man, because I've never really thought of it like that. But if you did have unlimited time, you would be better off going in, because you're only capable of so much, especially like, let's be honest here. We're not spring chickens. If we're in our 20s, I'm sure I could grind out more days than I could, but a lot of my life these days, I'll be 45 in, what day is it? 13 days. And, it's about working smarter, not harder. I was in a somewhat similar boat. I was supposed to be flying north for a caribou goat archery hunt with a buddy of mine, and he had hip problems and had to pull out. And I could have left earlier, but I could tell there was a little friction at home. Like, she was sucking it up, but I was like, kids not back in school yet. Things are still a little bit. And I'm like, they're not going anywhere. Maybe they'll bugle this week. Maybe they'll bugle next week. I don't know. Like, there's no magic rule that says, where I'm going, there's a lot of pressure, and there probably is more people take bulls earlier. But I also think, there's bulls to be had later. And so I made a somewhat similar decision and kind of push it back a week. Again, thinking the same as you have based on my previous experience. So I'm going to head up on the 11th. And I'll have 11 days. So 11th to the 22nd. I figure that's about I'm getting there a little bit early, but that's really about as prime as you can get. And then after that, it's out of your control, man. Cause I don't know I've worked so hard to like one year I go in early and it's dead and they're picking up as I'm leaving. So the next year I go in late and then I hear, oh, you should have been here a week ago. It was a bugle fest. And I'm like, I don't know, man. I've almost kind of given up on that. And it's just, they'll be what they'll be when I get there.
I kind of agree, which, that's why I think that, I was thinking before I came on, like maybe what we discussed, but to me, for me, archery, elk hunting for sure. I don't really rifle hunt elk anymore, but it's about being adaptable to whatever it is. So, we've had more rain down here and we have more grass than I've ever seen, right? I think you guys are probably just the opposite.
100%.
So, last year's probably going to be different than this year, just because of the environmental conditions. I might be different, right? Physically or with my capabilities. And so people that are like, I'm only going to go hunt this way because either that's all I know, or that is the experience I'm looking for, which, hey, I appreciate that because there's experiences I'm looking for too.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately for me, I want to kill an elk. That, if it requires me sitting a wallow, if it requires me calling, if it requires me not calling, whatever the case may be, then I'm going to do that. And every season, it seems like, and maybe starting a little later, because I'll get some intel from buddies, I'll kind of know what this season's going to be like. Are they going to be early? Are they going to be late? Are they going to be, my guess is, dispersed everywhere because they don't have to be concentrated because there's water and grass everywhere, and just trying to figure that out every year. They'll literally make you elk more than any other animal, to include whitetail, and as far as I'm concerned, will make you second guess yourself and make you wonder if you've even hunted ever in a day before, like no other animal in North America.
Yeah. Okay, so this is an excellent transition because this is what I'd like to spend some time digging into today. And let's step back to the macro because I think that's an excellent spot where you've begun. And obviously, without getting into specifics, when you start looking at your elk season, and maybe let's use this year as an example, what's your kind of planning approach? Do you look at like one or two smaller areas where you're planning to go in deep and long? Or is it more of a bigger, listen, we're going to go in fast and quick, check a bunch of areas, we're going to bounce around until we find fresh sign, and you maybe put 20 waypoints on your phone that all have some kind of likelihood of success, or you've seen what you're looking for before and you kind of bounce around, or is there some, balance of that?
Yeah. So, I'm not the only one that's talked about this, but I do like to joke it a little bit and say that this is the best kept secret in the hunting industry that none of the celebrities want you to know.
Okay, let's have
it.
And
Dan Staton talks about it, so I'm not the only one. But the reality is, very, very, very few of us that I know, that most people would know, that I think you would know, are going to be the people that do all the research, Google map it, e-scout the hell out of it, drop a waypoint into an area, scout that area, go in there for 10 days with a backpack, and that's it. That's their trip.
Yep.
And actually find consistent success year to year. I do not think that's the truth. I think that's what's portrayed. I think that that's what's romanticized. I think that that's what sells a lot of quality product, right? But that's not the advice that I would give my friends or people who reach out to me and ask, how do I go about doing this? Especially if you don't live in the environment like I do, right?
Right.
And so what I like to say is you have to drop the 20 waypoints, stay incredibly mobile, manage your energy level and resources and time, and probe in with a bunch of different techniques. And when you find a fruitful area, then commit.
Right.
Because, and again, maybe this is my age. I'm 54. Maybe this is a little bit of experience, good and bad. But when I put a pack on my back of 60 pounds and go 8 miles in, or pay, I've never done this, but if I paid a packer, right?
Yep.
And they drop me off at some random waypoint, I'm balls deep committed.
Yep. 100%.
And by the time I get back to the truck, either my time's up, my motivation's up, my energy's expended. Yeah. Right. Or maybe I've killed something, but most of the time you may get in there, especially nowadays, and go, well, shit, me and 6 other groups of hunters thought this was the perfect waypoint as well. And I can only now move so much within my time frame and physical limitations or the terrain to find an elk. And if they're not there, they're not there. So I've personally done, well, maybe we'll call it a hybrid approach. And again, I'm not the only one doing it, but not a lot of people are talking about it because, they're like, oh, bro, like you sleep in the back of your truck. I'm like, yes, I do.
Yeah.
Until I find what I'm looking for, and then I can strike. And I've got everything ready. And so my gear list is built that way. Here's my truck camp. Here's my bivy camp, that kind of thing. And then, like I mentioned to you before, that adaptability, as much as I don't want to do it, but let's just say that you get to trailhead 3 and you start looking around and maybe you've seen some things of interest. I gave this advice to a friend of mine who's from back east, and he's still in the process. Hopefully this year he kills his first elk, and he's so laser focused on going up over this one mountain, across this ridge, and down the other side before he can even stop to really look around or consider hunting. And I'm like, bro, there's a really good chance you're walking by a lot of elk and some really amazing opportunities. And he's also dealing with working at an altitude that he's not used to. I said, how about hunt around the trailhead for the first day, and then go in maybe a mile and hunt around there, and then maybe go in 3 miles and hunt around there. And if I find a wallow personally, if I find a wallow that's getting hit a half mile from the trailhead and I can still hear vehicles, I don't give a shit.
Yeah.
I will put up a tree stand or build a ground blind and sit there and kill a bull. And if that's what the hunting gods gave me that year, that's what I'll take. But that's the opportunity I found. And so many people will be, and to include myself back in the day, and I'm like, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that because I want this experience. I want this bugle fest. I want this rut fest. I want this calling thing. I want this and that. And I just found that I wasn't as successful as I became when I started going, I'm going to take what is given me and be, build enough skills and enough resource and enough versatility, not just physically, but also mentally, to be able to adapt and just, okay, that's what this is going to be like. It's going to be quiet. It's going to be silent. All right, that's going to suck, but now I have to focus on that technique because calling is just going to be a waste of my time. Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Dude, this is hitting so close to home for me. And this came up in another conversation I was having, but that has been the evolution of my first real, other than some stuff on Haida Gwaii, the Queen Charlotte's here, like my first real backpack elk hunt was Wyoming. I bet you my pack was 110 pounds, John. Like it was like wobbling like a Kafaru fulcrum filled to the brim with just the kitchen sink. I don't even know how I would have got an elk out. And went into Wyoming and walked, 4, 5, 6 miles deep, which it doesn't, again, I could say 10, but it wasn't. And sat there for 5 or 6 days. And, there's this really interesting thing called sunk cost fallacy, where people will stay irrationally dedicated to an outcome because of a previous investment. It typically comes in a business scenario. People won't kill. You must have to do this all the time. Like I'll ask you about a product and you're like, yeah, we discontinued it. That is psychologically very difficult to do because the company has invested a lot of time and energy and resources in creating that product. And even though the math says kill it, the heart has a hard time doing that. And I think we do that to ourselves on hunts. Once you load up that pack, man, and head in, psychologically, you don't want to head out until you have some version of success to head out with. And I think you will irrationally stay there longer. I almost started tricking myself. So this first honey hole that's on my map where I heard these bugles coming from, that's on the other side of this big chasm that I don't think anybody ever goes into. I started convincing myself I'm going to go in there with 3 days worth of food. And then I talk myself out of it. And then I'm talking myself back into it. And I had to draw this line in the sand And it's like, you're going in there with nothing. It doesn't matter if you get back at 2:00 in the morning, you're going to go spend one day in there. If after one full day, you have found concrete evidence that requires you to go back in, then, because your brain thinks, I'm going to waste the end of the day going to get food. But it's like risk versus reward. If I go in there for 3 days and waste 3 days, those 3 days are gone. And if I could get in there in a half a day and say, oh, my hunch is wrong, where they were last year, they're not this year, I need to get out. But you have just described like 100%. I'm even having like multiple gearless. I got different totes. I got the truck tote. I got the bivy tote. So when it is time to like switch modes of attack, it's just as simple as like empty the pack of that stuff, fill the pack with this stuff, and flip over into that other mode. But I'm not flipping over into that other mode until I have concrete evidence that requires me to flip into that other mode.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's, yeah, no, for the work analogy, spot on. I like to say there's no sacred cows, right?
100%.
But I think the less commitment you make, the easier it is to back out of that plan and then go find something else. I mean, at the end of the day, we only have, even if you got to hunt every day of the season, it's a finite amount of days. And so I always feel an urgency. Yeah. And it's like, to me, personally, the hardest thing to do is find elk, right? Or find elk I want to hunt, or find elk in areas I can hunt, right? Like, oh, that's good terrain, or that's, on the right side of the fence, or that's, in a distance that I think I can get in and get an elk out, right? I mean, there's a lot to that. And so I don't really want to burn all those assets I have until I have some idea. I mean, there has to be some commitment. But I think, and I'm certainly not pointing fingers or having really anybody in mind to quote blame, but I think that the perception is, and again, just talking to a lot of people, like I'm sure you do, where these guys are like, man, how do I do it? Like, me and my buddies, like we packed 8 miles in and then we got into this basin and like there was cattle there grazing, or there was a camp, or there were no elk. And I'm like, what'd you do? And they're like, well, we stood, hung around for 3-4 days, hoping beyond hope that something would show up. Maybe a guy kills a deer or something, and then they hike back out. And I'm like, man, like there's no real way to know if something's 8 miles in without really going 8 miles in. Right. And it can be amazing when you find it, but so many elk are killed within several miles of the road and not, tens of miles of the road. And then speaking for me, if I'm hunting by myself or even with a friend, like, man, like 3 mile radius from my camp or 3 mile radius from where I can get meat to a packer or a friend is, that's a lot. Yeah. And I just don't think people understand that either. And they're like, well, what are you going to do when you're 8 miles in and your pack's 110 pounds and you're going to leave all your gear, carry 110-pound loads out, then go back to get your gear and carry another 100? I mean, you just have to figure it out. And so I'm certainly not discounting that strategy. It's just not the only one is what I'm saying.
I think too, what I've finally learned is like, pick the animal that matches the experience that you want. Because I think I know what I want out of a backcountry hunt, and I used to try and fit a square peg into a round hole and like turn my elk hunt into that. But like, I'm just gonna, maybe there's places where it is, but so far where I've been successful and where I've elk hunted, it's just not built like that. And the animal's too damn big anyways. That's why I like sheep hunting. That's why I put mule deer hunts on the calendar. Like these are animals that are suited to those really long 10, 12 day excursions. They're definitely able to be packed out solo. Like, and I think that's a really good point too. Okay. So let's stay on.
But I think your point real quick, but I think
Yeah.
your point is so spot on. That's so very true. The animal matches the experience you're looking for. And the two you mentioned are spot on, perfect for those, kind of long, extreme, week-long, more 2-week-long backpack hunts. Yeah. An elk is not necessarily that animal. Antelope is not that animal, right? Like there's lots of animals that aren't that.
I'd even say most bear hunting isn't. I mean,
no.
It can be done. I've done it that way. But like they do so good on like mixed ag and other stuff. It should be your weekend warrior type after work. Like that should, for me, that's like my fun hunting. I'm going to cruise some logging roads. I'm going to have a good time. Like I'm not going to stress about it. And I do think, and this goes to your point earlier. That's what made me think about it. Like sometimes you just want an experience. My only point of feedback is pick the animal that matches that experience, because then you're going to probably have the experience and have a higher likelihood of success.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. And enjoyment.
Yeah.
Yep.
100%. Okay. So let's stay on this thread. We're going to cover a lot of ground until we see something that encourages us to stay put or apply further investigation. What are the kind of techniques we're using to look? Are we doing calling? Are we looking for physical sign? And then based on what we're doing to look, what do you need to see that's like, okay, this is good enough for me. I'm digging in a little bit deeper in this spot.
Well, I mean, ideally you see some elk. Ideally, but that's not necessarily a game changer because it depends when you're looking. So, you know, you have your areas, right? And you're gonna go in, you're gonna have a day pack. And listen, when you're elk hunting, I mean, it's not uncommon to cover 10, 12, 15 miles in a day, right? Depending on the terrain. So you can, it's round trip, but you can cover a lot of ground.
Yep.
And you know, obviously you're looking for sign. Obviously you're looking, that part of that sign is animals. But, you know, this is where I think locator bugles really help. So, you know, you get to different points. Corey Jacobson's talked about this a lot, but you throw a locator bugle out, you're hoping to get a response. Getting a response isn't immediately, man, I'm just like dropping in, committing 100%. But it's definitely, okay, mark that point of interest. If there's one, maybe there's others. And then you just keep doing that, right? Locate bugle, look for sign. Are you seeing water? Are there the three components that you know an elk needs? Are they there? Is there food? Is there cover? Is there water? Because year to year, based on those environmentals we talked about, especially this year where you're going, there might not be. I can tell you, having already antelope hunted this year, there's water effing everywhere.
Right.
So I don't know if sitting water is actually going to be that productive unless you just find that really super hot wallow that's just all tracked up and muddy. And you're like, maybe it is worth sitting here depending on the time of year and what the weather's going to be like. So there's that. And maybe you do that and you heard the one bugle and you go to another area and maybe go to a third area. And then you're like, well, you know what? My best option is to go back where I heard the bugle and hopefully he's still there. The other one is, and I know, here in Montana, kind of closer to town or the different towns, the elk will bugle, and there's actually some damn good elk in these mountains. But it seems like when the sun cracks the horizon, those elk won't bugle anymore, and the ones that do get killed pretty quick in the season. But if you can get there and, drive your roads or hike your trailheads and just listen in the dark, you will hear elk that you will never hear during the day.
Right.
And so, a couple times, and we got on, it was my buddy's bull, he'd found it, but we'd get there early, and we'd listen, find out where that group was, and then slip in the dark. So we didn't have to worry about cover. All we had to worry about was really wind, a little bit of noise. And we would try to get within, a couple hundred meters of the herd in the dark when they were talking, try not to get too close because you can't see anything. And then as the sun came up and the light got better and they'd start to shut up, we try to get eyes on and then start ghosting that herd, find out where they went for the day. Could we get in on them during the day? Do we wait for them to turn around and come back that night? But chances are they're not going to talk.
Right.
So that's another really good technique is elk hunting at night, right? Which, listen, I'm not one that really want to give up my sleep, but until you find the elk, you're really not hunting them, right? So that's another really good technique, but that allows, or that entails a lot of mobility, a lot of driving around, a lot of hiking around in the dark to figure it out. And if you're, again, just going into that one spot 3 nights in a row, you haven't heard shit, chances are there's nothing there.
Yeah.
And now you got to come all the way back out.
Yeah, 100%. I've actually put it in a lot of my plan. This is another reason why I like going solo, because I don't have to ask anybody to do this. But A lot of my plans is to drive to my next spot the night of so that I can sleep there. And even there's a lot of decent little like short hikes I can do where I'm literally planning on setting an alarm for 1 or 2. I'm going to wake up for an hour, do a little hike, maybe even blast a couple location bugles, or maybe just sit in the dark and be quiet and just see if I can hear twigs popping, because this is one of those areas where what I'm seeing and hearing for live elk is not matching what I'm seeing for sign. It's like, they got to be somewhere, man, because like that's fresh shit on the ground. Those are fresh rubs over there. Like somebody's somewhere. And I think it's like you said, these really heavily pressured areas. And I don't know if it's an urban myth. Everybody always complains that BC bulls aren't as vocal as other bulls. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if it's not true. But we don't tend to have like the really aggressive calling sequences up here that we do down there. I think it's a lot more common of a strategy to locate, go silent, sneak in, and then maybe do a little bit of cow calling kind of once you get in their bedroom, just to like line things up for shot opportunities and whatnot. But what about physical sign, like scat, rubs? Is there stuff that could be so enticing to you that maybe you're not able to put eyes on bulls, but you're like, this is worth at least giving another day here and sticking around?
Yeah, yes, it tends to. I think there's a couple factors you have to take in mind. So, I've seen areas that literally look like they were, just tore up by D9 cats, right? Or just every tree's rubbed to death, and you're like, well, clearly they like to rut here, or at one point they like to rut here. But going back to the weather, I know that's a historical place. Probably they rut, but I don't know if they're going to rut there every year. So if I get there, it's middle of the month, third week of September, they're not there. Those rubs aren't freshened. They're old. I'm like, well, they were here, but they're not here this year. Right. So I think some of that preseason scouting, if you do any of that, you have to be a little bit cautious, because again, when, we've had years here that were super dry, concentrated the elk, super easy to find, hard to kill because there are a lot of them. Year like this, water, grass everywhere, man, they're dispersed. Easier to kill when you find them because they're in small groups, but you got to find them. They're not, and I don't know this to be a fact, but it seems like it's true that the cows historically like to go to certain areas. But I don't know if they'll exactly go to the exact same spot if when they get there, that feed cover and water isn't there, right? But if you're seeing fresh sign, and we hunted Wyoming, well, it's probably been 8-9 years ago, pretty decent unit. But same thing, Jay, we kept seeing like fresh sign, and we're like, man, they got it. Like they're here and they haven't been here all that, like they were just here. And we weren't getting there early enough, and we had to get there early in the dark, see where they were, and then dog them in the dark. And then, they'd bugle, but they weren't bugling like they were at the dark. But where we thought they were already farther up the mountain. And so getting there in the dark allowed us to, get closer enough to them and then keep tabs on them going up. But yeah, if there's fresh sign, not just, I've been there where it's like, 1 pile, 2 piles, that's not really enough. But if it looks like, yeah, there's definitely a small herd at a minimum here, yeah, for sure. If there's fresh rubs, now a bull could be moving through, right? So there's a little bit of, I think, interpretation that has to go on. But clearly what you're really looking for, if possible, is either bugle, audio confirmation, or visual in seeing some elk. And, that gives me, it's kind of like when I'm whitetail hunting, I put a stand up, haven't seen a deer in like a week. And I'm like, am I just an idiot? There any deer even around, and then on the 6th day you end up killing a buck. But yeah, that's kind of what I'm looking for. But that's why I don't want to just commit to one area based on a lot of e-scouting. One, I'm not good at it. I don't like it. I don't have time for it. So, I do minimal e-scouting. A lot of it's like, find good terrain and then just get in there and move around a ton and see if I can find something.
Would you ever utilize short-term cameras? One of the ideas I'm toying around with this year, because a lot of the area I'm in is going to be me crisscrossing. And so it probably wouldn't be there's probably areas that it's literally going to take me an hour and a half to hike into, throw some bugles and hike out. And I'm thinking, maybe just throw 2 cameras in the back of the bag. If I do find a fresh wallow that maybe they're on, maybe I could just throw up a camera, come back in 2 days if I'm not able to kind of get that bugle or get that visual confirmation.
It's not something I've ever done, even for whitetail. It's not something that's
like you've never used cameras at all?
No.
Okay, so this is like a principle. Like it's just not something you're interested in doing.
It's just not something I'm interested in doing.
Okay.
Listen, if a buddy gives me intel on a big buck or bull, I'm not going to say no. I'm somehow opposed to that. It's not something I've done.
Okay.
Certain states like Montana, I know for sure Alaska just, I think, passed a law. But anyways, you can't even, Utah, maybe Arizona, you can't even use cameras in the field season. During hunting season, right? So I think I just don't have a lot of time to like put cameras out 3-4 months in advance and then get disappointed when the buck or bull aren't there. But if I could do it real time, I probably would be more enticed to do it. I think it's a great, why wouldn't you if you can, right? I've just never done it. I have nothing against it.
My area is kind of too far to, my daughter's getting older now, and next year I'm going to plan some camping trips so that I can like get up there and do a couple hikes and put some cams up. But it's just, it's like a 13, 14 hour drive. I'm not going to run up there to put cameras up in the middle of summer. But I was thinking, when I got some cheapies off Amazon, it's $75. If I never go back, I never go back. It's $75 in an SD card. I'll get it next year. If I remember, I'll put a point in Onyx and maybe go pick it up. But that was something else somebody brought up to me that I thought would be a good idea.
Yeah, okay. we ran cameras last year in an area. I didn't, but my buddies did. Man, we had some incredible bulls on film, and we're thinking, holy shit, like first day we're going to kill somebody's going to kill one of these bulls.
Yeah.
And we got in there and, went to check the card, nothing on the card except cattle. Cattle had been moved in, free range cattle on Forest Service land. And guess what? Every elk left.
Gone.
They were not using that water source. I learned, maybe other people have had different experience. I never saw an elk and a moo cow, use the same water source. If the cows were there, the elk were gone.
So I'm going to give you an exception.
I'm sure there is.
I arrowed my bull
my point
last
is,
year,
it
75
disappointed
yards
us.
from a cow.
Really? No kidding.
I could see them. What was hilarious. So funny story, bugling is near the tail end of the very last day. I'm covering ground, doing everything you're supposed to do. And, nothing. I'd seen 2 moose. I'd got to 25 yards on 2 different bull moose, but they didn't meet the point restriction for the area, so I couldn't shoot them. And then I come around the corner and I see this giant wallow. Like, you want to talk D9. I'm talking like 50, 60 yards long, couple feet deep, like banks to this thing. Like, it was crazy. And I'd heard the cows, and I could see the cows from up on this hill. I was coming down this big kind of like aspeny terraced bench before a kind of a dark river bank. And I could probably see half a dozen cows. And I turn around the corner and I'm looking at the back of tines and I just freeze. And I'm like, go through that moment of disbelief. Like, I spent 20 days hunting elk last year, and that's still the only elk I saw the whole 20 days. And I saw, like, I get the moment the shakes start hitting, and I'm like, okay, he doesn't know I'm here. No, nothing has actually happened. So just chill out, take some calming breaths, relax, and figure out what you're going to do. I lean my head back around this tree, and he's laying in the wallow face into the hill. And I'm just like, it did turn out later, he had a broken jaw and he was missing half of one of his tines. I think he'd gotten in a fight the week before because he was physically in perfect condition. So it wasn't like he'd been like that for long, but I think he probably hadn't been able to eat in a day or two and he was just disoriented because I don't know, I've never seen an elk kind of do what this elk did. And maybe that explains the proximity of the cows. Like, he just didn't give a shit. But he's laying in there. I get my shit together, and long story short, after a kind of marginal shot the first time, I take him broadside at 30 and he piles up 20 yards after that. And the cows never even budged. They just sat there kind of like munching away while I processed this elk. But it's pretty thick back in there too. So I don't know, maybe they've just gotten used to each other.
I've seen them close, but it didn't seem to me like they wanted to use the same water sources.
Interesting.
Yeah, as those cows. And so, yeah, anyways, it was super disappointing because we were getting all amped up and had all these elk on camera. And then, some rancher moves his cattle or the cattle move in and the elk were gone. And yeah. Kind of crazy.
Okay, so now we've applied our macro strategy. Now we've turned up some elk. You've talked about some of your initial strategies, especially ones that you would apply if calling doesn't work. But what's your A game calling strategy? What's the thing that you reach for first to see if this is going to work to get these guys to come and play a traditional calling game with you?
So, man, everything's nuanced, right? So forgive me, but Montana has such diverse terrain. There's really three kind of sort of, in my mind, distinct environments or geographies you can hunt them in. Northwest, where it's crazy, crazy thick. I've not hunted them up there. All my years in Alaska, I don't need to do that again. There's here where I live, where it's much more traditional, mountainous, timbered terrain, but big open parks and things like that. And then there's the eastern part of the state where it's super open and coulee country and you can glass them from a long ways away. So I can't speak to the Northwest, but my buddies up there say, if you don't call and they don't talk, you ain't killing them. Yeah. Right. Where I live, I talked about calling in the dark, identifying, locating, trying to find them. That works. When I had middle of the state and out east where I was the last couple of years, I try to never bugle if I don't need to, because if I can see the elk, I don't need to bugle at them. And I'm okay calling. I'm certainly no world champion, right?
Yep.
I'm okay calling. I've called in several bulls over the last couple of years. Buddies have killed, etc. So I've got no issue with my competence there. But I'm like, there's a part of me that says, why would I ever let them know? If I know they're there, why would I ever let them know I'm here if I don't need to?
Right.
So I would just say I use calling sparingly. I know some very accomplished elk hunters that they call, they're almost hoarse by the end of the hunting season because they call so much. I like to use locator bugles to get a response. I'm trying to kill a bull, not necessarily a cow.
Yeah.
So I try to use locator bugles to get them. And I try to, if I can, get them talking. My experience has been, I've called bulls in to bow range and got shots, or buddies gotten shots. But a lot of times I'm using the call, the bugle as an instrument to locate and then try to get closer. And then at that point, if I think I'm within 100, 200 meters, and Paul Medell talks about this quite a bit, the elk nut, but trying to now get set up and get their interest. And honestly, what I think, in an area maybe where I live, that's like maybe over calling and a larger population, instead of bugling, instead of cow calling, and maybe half the time I cow call, the cows run away.
Right.
I start raking.
Okay.
I just start raking a bush or a tree and just rake and see if I can pique that elk's interest. And if you have an opportunity where there's a shooter, then the shooter should be clearly in front, right, or towards the elk, and the guy raking should be behind. If not, like this year, chances are I'm by myself. I'm going to probably rake, and then I've got one elk decoy that I can like pin to a tree, right, or a bush. And then I also have another elk decoy I can shoot through if I need to. So I have to play that by ear. But just raking, because if I'm close enough that it can hear me, then maybe it shows a sign of aggression, shows a sign of an elk, but it's also not something that people overly do, and you can hardly screw it up.
Right.
Right. So I try to do that, and where I struggle is being patient to give that opportunity. If I can't see the animal, 45-ish minutes, do a bunch of raking, maybe throw a cow call here or two out, but not get super aggressive with the bugle unless he starts to talk. And then if he starts to talk, then if he bugles, I'll bugle back.
Okay.
If he bugles, I'll bugle back. If he bugles, I'll try to ramp him up. But if not, I'll just rake and try to keep it kind of cash, maybe throw a cow call out and try to pique his interest. Again, Paul Medell talks a lot about that, but I think that's I don't think it's any less aggressive, but I think it's potentially less threatening to a broader group of elk that I'm at least running into, and not just blowing because as soon as you blow the cows out, the bull's going to go with them in September.
Yeah.
So I've kind of just boogered the whole thing, right? That I've spent maybe days trying to figure out where they are.
This is really interesting because you talked about romanticizing the backpack hunt at the beginning of the conversation. And I think a lot of people have this trap of romanticizing the calling game. Like when you see these pros do it, like the Born and Raised guys, Corey Jacobson, like these other guys that are putting out all these videos, like that looks like something you want to do. You know what I mean? Like that is cool as hell. I also think those guys are crazy talented, and they probably go through a lot of bulls that don't work out and don't make it off the editing room floor. And they have the tenacity to keep at it until they find one that wants to play the game they want to play. But I think this also ties in your adaptability, because that's what I'm hearing from some elk hunters have an A game. And they say, I'm going to play this A game until I find an elk that's willing to play this game with me. And then other people, Chris Rowe is another guy that talks about this all the time. It's like you got to have a bunch of different tools in your toolkit. And then depending on the circumstances that are presented to you, you decide what tool is going to be best for that particular situation. I love this idea of like the call-less rake though, because raking is something I've been hearing more and more people talking about it. And I think it's because, like you illustrated, it has a very low risk profile. Like you can't really screw up doing a rake. They're not going to run away. You're not going to do it wrong. Is it as powerful as a bugle as a cow call? Maybe not, but you're testing the waters. And I think the downside is relatively non-existent.
Yeah. I think you have to, there's a lot of things that come into play. Like if it's super windy, raking's not going to do shit. Right. They're not going to hear it, right? Yeah. So you might have to bugle. They're probably not going to hear cow calls. I know you just had, Joel Turner on last week, or
yes.
you published it last week?
Yeah.
Joel is one of those guys who's a crazy talented elk caller, and I've sat through some of his seminars, right? And and he gets it done, right? I haven't talked to him a lot about his techniques. I've just, sat through his clinics. I've sat through Corey's clinics, and I've talked to Corey a lot. And Corey clearly has a lot to offer to the public. Corey will sit there and tell you, man, I just keep bugling and hiking until I find a bull that wants to play.
Yep.
Which is awesome. And he's clearly, him and his friends have made a career out of it. That's not me. I'm not the 7-8-time world elk calling champion, right? I have that, I don't need that experience. The experience I'm looking for is drawing back and shooting a bull. Like that's the experience I'm ultimately looking for. You have to also understand that, guys like Joel and Corey and all those guys, like born and raised, like those guys grew up there. I grew up back east in Ohio hunting whitetail. Like I've literally lived in Montana 9 years, right? This will be my 9th season. So it's not like I've learned from guys, but it's not like this is in my blood. Like I'm still learning. And so the bigger my bag of tricks, oh, you know what? My calling was, I was too loud. I was too aggressive. I wasn't aggressive enough. And I'm like, just, right? And so it's like, I am coming at this, like the more I know and the more bag of tricks I have, the more I can apply, because at the end of the day, I'm probably like most people in the sense that I don't get that many opportunities on bulls in archery season every year. And so, I'm not getting, 15 bulls to respond to me every day like maybe Corey is, right? Because maybe my calling's not as good, or maybe I'm not in as good an area or whatever. So it's like, if I can get in there and never call and spot and stalk that thing, like that's how I've killed some of my biggest elk.
Yeah.
Is let the elk do what the elk does and let the predator do what he does, which is slip in silently, right? But it doesn't always work depending on the environment you're in. Probably doesn't sound like in the Peace River it's going to work too well for you. So you need to kind of like locate and then identify where it is, and then maybe slip in and locate again, and and then try to pull them to you. But I don't think that works. In my experience, it doesn't. It only works a short time within the rut. I just told you that Montana's elk season's 6 weeks long. If I tried the same technique all 6 weeks, it might work 1 week, but it's not going to work the other 5 potentially, right? So you just have to be able to. You said you went 11 days sooner, 11 days later. Like, so the techniques are going to change, I think, and that's when you have to go in, take the pulse of what's going on, and go, all right, this is probably the best technique for me this week, or in this area, or for these elk, or this environment, or whatever the case may be. That's kind of how I've been approaching it.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. I know you take your shooting very seriously, both from like the kind of practice and the psychology of the actual shooting and the tackle itself. What is your archery setup for elk, or if it stays the same, what's your archery setup this year?
So my archery setup is a little bit different. I'm shooting the same bow. So I've been shooting Hoyts for, I don't know, 20 some years. So I got an RX-7 Ultra. I always shoot a longer axle to axle. I have a very average, modest setup, 28 and 3/4 inch draw-ish, right? 70 pounds, arrow somewhere around 460 to 470. I think this year's 451. I shoot fixed sights. I have been shooting the last, think 4 or 5 years. Well, maybe longer than that. I shoot two different broadheads. I have 2 different broadheads in my quiver, but the last 4 or 5 years I've been shooting Grim Reapers. Okay. And I pick the arrow and broadhead combo to match kind of the environment of the situation, right? So if I can, I'll shoot a fixed or a hybrid as my primary shot. But if I need a longer shot, or it's windy, or I need follow-up shots, then I'll go to my expandables, right? And for the most part, they fly together. So to me, that's been more than adequate for elk, basically for anything outside of like dangerous game in North America. That's pretty much been just a very tried and true kind of setup. 28 and a half, 29 inch draw, 70 pounds, 450-ish grain arrow, and just a quality broadhead.
Are you still shooting a back tension release? And do you hunt with that?
I am 100% still shooting a back tension release. Okay. Yep. So I've been doing that for, well, I don't know. I want to tell you, I think I looked it up. I just can't remember. However long the Silverback's been out, I've been shooting a back tension release longer even than that, because I started shooting the Carter Evolution prior to that. Okay. And prior to that, it was, I don't even remember. It was some weird like garage store thing, but yeah, I love the back tension release for a lot of different reasons. One, I think it's a great training aid. It makes you really check in on your shot and make sure that your process is good. In the moment of truth, be it shooting for beers with your buddies, or at a total archery challenge, or that bull of your dreams comes in, when you draw back and anchor in with a back tension release, you can only do one thing to get that arrow to go off, right? And that's to execute the shot properly. Yeah, you can dick a few things up, but for the most part, it's calming for the mind. And I've shot, well over 100 animals with back tension releases, multiple species, and I've never felt that it's ever done anything but made me the most lethal bow hunter I could be in the field. So yeah, 100%. I'm shooting the Evolution 2, the knock-on Evolution 2, which is a version of a Carter Evolution 2, I think. Yeah, great tool.
Love it. I shoot a hinge primarily because some work I did with Joel, and
I love a hinge too.
Yeah,
and
and people always ask,
shoot.
Go ahead.
I will have a back tension, multiple back tensions, hinges, and then one just standard thumb.
Yeah.
In my release bag all year, and I will just make it a point of just trying a bunch. But the hinge is another great one. Snyder, that's what he hunts with, is a hinge, right? Yeah. I've killed a few things with a hinge, but I have defaulted the other way. But either one, is great medicine.
Yeah. And I think it's really interesting because people always say, well, aren't there times hunting when due to wind or due to this, you do need to kind of punch a trigger? And I try and explain it like this. I don't know how to explain it. I know this. When I get settled in my shot sequence, I almost want to say my bow goes off when I decide that it's going off when I'm hunting. Because like as soon as my pin settles, like it's such a minute action. It feels like a big action when you're really concentrated on it. And I think it almost feels more natural when you're hunting because your attention is actually focused on the animal and not what's going on right here. When we're at the range, we're focused here. And so this feels like an eternity. But when I'm out hunting, man, the moment that pin settles right where I want it to, pop. Like it's just butter. And I've made better shots hunting than I have at the range all day. And I think it's because of that, the necessity of that increased focus. And as long as you've done your homework and got your practice reps in, the system just takes care of itself.
Yeah, if you've got enough reps, the subconscious is going to take over with this part, right? With the pulling on the rhomboid and the hand manipulation and whatever it is, right? And you're solely focused on the pin and the animal. And so that's all you can concentrate on. It's never cost me an opportunity or an animal. And listen, if I've had to let down, I would have had to let down no matter what my release is. Right. And I wouldn't promote punching the trigger no matter what, kind of a wing and a prayer kind of thing. But it is all about those preseason reps. Right. That lay that foundation or grease that groove in your mind to where you can execute the shot you described in that high tension scenario, right? Because without one, you're not going to get the other. Yep. And so it's just critical that you put those reps in the off season so that you do get that flow state like you were describing.
Yeah. I want to close out with some Instagram questions, but first I'd like to ask you, are there some common mistakes you see people making in regards to elk hunting? And I think we've touched on a few things, but this could have to do with gear choices people are making, the mental attitudes that they're taking, the approaches that they're taking. What are some of the common things you see people making mistakes on when it comes to elk hunting?
Well, a couple things that come to mind is they completely underestimate the size of these animals.
Right.
They are effing huge.
Yes, they are.
And, as many as I've seen on the ground, I'm still sometimes when I walk up, I'm like, how the hell are we going to cut this thing up and get it out of here? Seriously. So I think they underestimate how big they are, which means they underestimate their ability to get them out of the field. Mm-hmm. Two, I think they underestimate their toughness. This is not a whitetail. I don't care what you say, how big a whitetail or mule deer you've shot. These things are absolute beasts. And when they are all hopped up on cot or crack or insert, terrorist drug, these things are getting gored and beaten to hell. And you're going to go up there and kill them with an arrow. You better have your shit together, and it better be a great shot. And it better be from a really good setup, well-tuned, great broadhead. Like, you cannot underestimate the toughness of these animals. And the last one I would say is that we touched on it briefly is the very small area that you can reasonably expect to cover in the mountains, either in a day or on like a backpack hunt we were talking about earlier. You can only cover a very small segment of that, right? So it's easy to fly around on Google Earth and OnX and do all this stuff, and I'm going to go here and I'm going to go there and I'm going to go and I'm put water and camp. And the reality is when you get there, you're only going to be able to cover a very small portion of that. So just take where you are, draw a 3-mile radius around that as you in the middle. But then you also have to factor in not just how far, but how quickly. And the reality is off trail, blowdown, altitude, heavy pack, day 7, all those things, you're going to move around a lot slower. So I think that people need to be more conservative in their approach and planning to these hunts in the mountains, be it for an elk or mule deer or whatnot. And I think that they will find more enjoyment and then give themselves some grace to go, you know what, instead of going 8 miles in one day, how about we take 2 days to go 8 miles in? Or how about we take 3 days to go 8 miles in and hunt our way in? And then if we find something good, don't be afraid to pull up short, right? All those little things, it's basically comes down to experience or maybe lack of in the mountains, in the backcountry. With more and more people wanting to do this, it's an amazing thing. I mean, you're literally, in my opinion, when they're bugling, like when they're rutting, you're hunting dinosaurs, right?
Yeah.
Or as close as we'll get. Um, but it's masters, if not PhD level hunting, especially with the bow on public land. It is nothing to be trifled with. Like, this is going to take all your effort, and it might take many, many years to find the success you're looking for. And I think you should just be okay with that journey.
I love it. It's funny. I had to look up my hunter safety to apply to Idaho this morning. And I'm coming up on 10 years since I got my hunter safety in British Columbia. So really, that's how long in the first couple of years, not nearly as focused as the last. But that last point you made, even after having 15 years as a forestry engineer in British Columbia, still to this day, I haven't learned. Like, I overestimate my own capacity in the backcountry. Like my eyes are bigger than my feet all the time.
It is. It's hard not to.
It really is. And I'm finally just getting there now, where like this year on the sheep hunt, I took what we want to do in the first day and we cut it in half. We set up camp at 3:00 in the afternoon. Like, is that the most hardcore thing on the planet to do? Nope. But did my feet feel good? Did my back feel good the next day? Did I wake up excited to hunt? Like, and when you're in there for 12 days, going an extra 3 or 4 miles, like, it has no impact on the future of the hunt. But in your mind, like, it was the difficult decision to make. But I'm trying to do a lot more of stuff like that to get those types of returns.
It's the hardest thing for me to do, and I've talked about this several times, but it's to get on mountain time.
Right.
It's to leave the hustle and bustle of our lives behind and go, you know what? Mother Nature doesn't give a shit. And I need to get on mountain time. And if I also need to manage this finite resource I have, right? Which is food, water, my energy, my fitness. And a lot of people, and I'm not saying people go out of their way not to, but like, a lot of us don't talk about that. Like, hey, I hiked in and I didn't get all the way, or hey, you know what? Yeah. We stopped at 3:00 to glass and maybe just see if we can hear some bugles this evening. There's nothing wrong with that. There are no rules to this.
Right.
There are some better ways to do it than others, but I think that, somehow, some way, like, it's only been one way, one technique, one way to, and if you don't do it this way, you're not a cool guy. It's like, no, bullshit. That's not true. And I have to, I've been doing this a long time, and I still have to tell myself that, because we're guys and we got a lot of testosterone and we got egos, but those mountains are going to kick your ass pretty quick.
Yeah, they are. How are you doing for time? We good for some Instagram questions?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. We're not going to ask that because that's a bad question. This is a little bit off topic, but kind of interesting myself, and I could probably guess at the answer, but I'm not gonna. Barklow has always been an advocate for synthetic base layers. Why the Sitka Merino now?
So I said, I'm not anti-wool, I'm pro-synthetic.
Love it.
With that said, there's absolutely not only a place for wool, but a lot of people, maybe even the majority, prefer wool over synthetic. And there's pros and cons to each, right? We never had, well, in my opinion, and several of us at Sitka, we never felt we had a great, high quality wool program. We had a wool piece here, a wool piece there. We now have and are offering our consumer a full suite of wool base layers, all 3 weights, many silhouettes, that I think is as good as anything in the entire outdoor industry right now. That's why. And you know what? I've even worn some of it last year on film, this year for my antelope hunt, and I like some of it. I really do. When I go into the wet, I'm still going to wear synthetic, but there's absolutely a place for wool. And at the end of the day, you can't go wrong choosing either.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point. When people have asked me my response, because I've swung over fully synthetic even in my insulation layers, and I've always said, listen, I don't have a problem with merino. The problem I had was that the pieces at the time didn't function the way I wanted them to function. Primarily, they took too long to dry and they didn't hold up structure. And I'm a guy, if I go in for 12 days, I take one base layer. I don't change. There's not a backup.
Me too.
And the problem is, after day 3, the thing went to shit. It's hanging off my body. It's all floppy. And I do feel like it's almost that time. Like, this is what happened with synthetic insulation. Like, people don't remember, even 5-6 years ago, synthetic insulation wasn't where it is today. The reason we all had down is because the synthetic sucked.
Right.
And then, starting 2-3 years ago, this like Aerolite and this cooler technologies start coming online. And it's like, okay, I'm going to reinvestigate it. I do. The pack weights line up, the insulation properties line up. Okay, I'm switching over from down. I'm not, I could be wrong. I think the same thing could be said for merino. I almost feel like I'm at that point now where I need to go do some testing with my systems, because there may be some products that are out now, such as your own, that solve those problems I had with those systems previously.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I'm pro synthetic, and that's still my default. I like to be dry, and I like the durability of it, period. Like full stop. So, but there's options now.
Yeah. Do you think people are overcalling to elk? And do you think one cause of this could be influencers selling calls?
Yeah, just as a general statement, I think that's true. Influencers aside, and I'm not, I'm certainly not going to disparage anybody. I think that if you go out, and you and I have done this, Jay, I'm sure, right? But when you go out in the woods to elk hunt and there's no bugles, it's really boring.
Yep.
Like, you don't even know if there's elk on the planet. And so what do? You call in the hopes of getting a response. I just talked about locator bugles, right? Well, everybody and their brother goes out there to get a locator bugle, and all of a sudden we're overcalling. But what I've seen more than anything, ran into this in Colorado a couple years ago, is people who aren't even elk hunting out there bugling to try to pull a bull in, get them on film, get a response, have that interaction. There were muzzleloader hunters wearing orange that had mule deer tags, because it was that season that overlapped with archery elk.
Yep.
Bugling to bulls. That's a problem. There's people in Utah and Montana going into prime units that have cow tags, that have spike tags, bugling to try to get that 360 bull to come in and then shoot the spike.
Yeah.
They're ruining it for everybody, because these animals are not unintelligent. And then honestly, and this, but these apex predators I've had wolves F up hunts for me so bad, that these animals are just very, very cautious anymore. Right. And I think that's the argument for going deep into the backcountry, to get away from some of that. Right. But again, I don't necessarily think that that's always the best technique.
Yeah. Do you have any tips for hunting elk if they go silent, and for beetle kill areas or areas with a lot of blowdown? I'm not sure how bad. Did you guys have a bunch of beetle kill in Montana?
I haven't personally run into it. I
think maybe up in the north, but that would be about it.
Yeah, but I haven't, like I said, I haven't really hunted up there for elk anyways. Yeah. So I don't really know about the blowdown. I mean, this is where this is where rates of movement just slow to an absolute crawl. And you're like, oh, I covered, 1.5K in a day. And you're like, no way, bro. And I'm like, well, yeah, when you're climbing over blowdown. Yeah. And what was the first part of that question?
How to hunt elk once they go silent. So let's make it a little more interesting. Like, you did have them call in and then they just shut up on you.
Well, again, that's what I told you maybe locally, is I try to locate in the dark, and then I just try to get in that general area or zone, and either sit there all day and see if when they stand up and come back out in the evening, that you can catch them out in the parks where you can glass them, right? Or maybe that bull, if you're close, will glunk or get up and go to wallow, or, give one, little like lazy growling bugle in his bed. And sometimes that's all it takes to then close the distance and get right on the edge of the herd and sit there. It's not the funnest thing to do, but what are your other options? Yeah. Right. But it's like, you got to be in that area. And that's where that nighttime identification can at least get you on the target. And then you have to start slowly closing in, as you can. And it doesn't always work, right? I mean, sometimes they you thought they were over here and they're over here and you end up getting winded. But that's the best I've come up with.
Best Sitka pattern for September elk in BC. So thick timber with meadowed openings.
Yep. Subalpine. Hands
I was
down,
like, that's what it's built for, man.
That is literally what I built it for. Yep.
Yeah. Tips for hunting high pressure areas where there's lots of recreational vehicles and traffic.
My only tip is, and we had a premium unit in Wyoming years ago, like I mentioned, and it was a very high traffic, what is it called? Not HOV, but anyways, ATVs and stuff like that, right? Those off-road vehicles, which we had one to access. And what we realized is they're not hunting a lot, right? Or very often they're not hunting. And so wherever they are, we were hunting where they weren't.
Okay.
And a lot of times those animals were getting pushed closer to the road than we thought. And so they're leaving the trailheads, they're leaving they're not coming back till dark. A lot of times there were animal concentrations within a mile of the trailheads because that was where they were finding sanctuary during the day.
Right.
So I like to call them soft zones, or those zones that are just like so not obvious. Like, what idiot would possibly hunt within a mile of the parking lot? Maybe the smartest guy you ever saw, right? So I know whitetail hunting, public land whitetail hunting, that has killed a lot of bucks for guys.
Great. What's your remedy to wet, cold socks and boots? I pack 2 pairs of socks and use a fire to dry my boots.
So you're probably not going to dry your boots. If they're insulated, if they have Gore-Tex, you're probably not going to dry your boots unless, you're in a cabin, or and even if you take the time to build a fire, which isn't a guarantee, they're maybe not going to be 100% dry, but I don't really want to, maybe I'm lazy. I don't really want to take the time to do that. What I just wrote about this in the September newsletter for Knowledge from Storms, but it's what's called a vapor barrier sock. It's basically a waterproof barrier. Think about a plastic bag almost, but you put your dry foot in this warm, dry sock and then pull this waterproof barrier over top of it. And then you can slide that down into a cold, wet, frozen boot. It's going to keep a pretty nice atmosphere inside that VBL sock. Over time, it'll get sweated out, but that's if you want to keep moving and hunting and stay active and not worry about it, that's your best recourse, or like a Gore-Tex sock, sealskin sock, something like that. But once boots get wet in most field conditions, they are going to stay wet. Especially with insulation or Gore-Tex, they're going to stay wet the entire time.
Yeah. The only thing that I'm going to add from that, and
please.
I feel like people, like I always thought there were basics to layering systems, and I assumed everybody understood the basics. But the longer I do this podcast and the more questions I got, I just went hunting with a guy who brought 5 shirts with him because every time he got to the hill, he took one off. And in the middle of the hunt, I'm like, what are you doing, man? You stop, leave it on, grab your puffy. He's like, but I'm wet. I'm like, shut up, grab your puffy, put it on, sit down. I'm going to walk over there. Reach me in 20 minutes and let me know how your life's going. I was like, this is so basic. Like, this shit was designed, but the engine that runs it all is your body heat. And if you don't let that body heat do its job, and I feel the same way about my feet, I think people are taking their boots off too soon. Now, fair enough. You get a soaker in a creek, there's nothing you can do about that. But if you've been walking through wet grass all day, when you get to camp at night, unless I've got some kind of hot spot or something that needs to be addressed, those boots, and this is an old trick from tree planting. I never took my boots off until I went to bed.
Hell no.
Because
unless I absolutely have to.
Yes, 100%. And now listen, if it's a sheep hunt and it's dry and you're throwing on Crocs, I don't care. But if we're talking like those shoulder seasons, kind of wet, because the other thing that people don't understand is that's that ambient air temperature that's killing you. I don't care how big the fire is. When it's like 9 or 10 degrees Celsius with like 70 to 80% humidity, you might warm those boots up, but ain't drying them out.
They're not drying out. No, they're not. Yep. Don't take your boots off until you get in your tent.
Yeah, 100%. We touched on this a little bit, but synthetic versus merino in the context of hunting BC and its wet conditions.
Yeah, I think synthetic rules supreme in those environments.
Yeah. Well, this gentleman clearly doesn't know you. Why is John so nice and humble?
Ah! I don't know.
It's just, that's the way God blessed you. That's all we got, man. I know you'd rather be out elk hunting, but selfishly, I'm glad your situation took the turn that it did.
It worked out well, dude. It worked out. I was going to give you a hard time and I was like, nope. He just wins the lottery, I guess, this time. I was glad to talk to you. I mean,
I knew the timing was off. I'm like, nobody's going to be able to talk elk hunting in the first week of September. When you threw back this Thursday, I was like, yeah, man, works for me, dude.
Well, I wasn't going out over Labor Day anyways. I'd already decided last year. It was so hot. Like I said, it was just so hot, so brutal. The chances of you getting, finding success limited anyways. I was just going to save my resources, get some work done. And then when I do go out, it's like full concentration, immersion, and so I'm just like, honestly, I feel like Christmas morning's coming because it just keeps building and my friends are out there and I feel kind of jealous, but it just keeps building. I'm just like going to be so focused and dialed. So I'm looking forward to it.
Give a little self-promotion here. So you touched on Knowledge from Storms a little bit, but let me know how the website and the newsletter's going. I'll provide links to all that and anything else people should know about.
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram, which is at @Barklow. So that's my last name. And probably, try to put a video a week up, some educational content for the backcountry traveler. So it's not very specific to hunting always. Got a website, knowledgefromstorms.com. Lots of videos. All my newsletters are on there. You can subscribe to the newsletter on there. There's a free downloadable PDF for trip planning. A lot of great resources there. You can email me from there if you want. I respond to every message at some point. Also have my first outdoor class, Backcountry Mission Planning, out. That's done amazingly well so far. That's at outdoorclass.com. And it basically is my 30 years of experience in the backcountry boiled down into 16 chapters. And I'm really excited how it came out. I'm writing my second course right now. But those are basically the platforms that that people can find me, check me out, learn some stuff, I hope. And listen, I learned from lots of people too that I have interactions with. So it's been fun. It's been fun. I realized, kind of going back to the nice part, I realized I was actually a selfish prick by having all this knowledge and information and just not trying to share it and just like, quote, give it away. Right. And honestly, the best part is when I hear people respond back. I just talked to a guy. Well, I emailed back and forth, but he was a guy up in Canada. And, he started by saying, hey, man, like your lessons not only saved my life, but a couple people in my group, and it was this whole story. But that's really why I do it. I just love to know that it's making a difference. So yeah.
Yeah, you definitely are making a difference. And I'll give one kind of more specific shout out because a lot of people are going to be wondering why we didn't hammer the gear in this episode. And I think it's because John does a really good job covering that in other places. And I don't think we need to rehash some of the topics that he's already discussed. But you recently put up an Instagram post that has your whole gear list for the season. So if you were looking for in this podcast for like some specific recommendations on like what pants or what base layer or what type of layering system John uses, go to his Instagram. That whole list is posted up there.
It's on the website as well now.
Perfect.
There's a gear list section. People can go, and I try to be very as specific and detailed as I can be on the gear list. I try to talk more generalities when I'm trying to teach about concepts like we're talking about body heat being our heat source. But in the gear list, I just tell you exactly what I wear.
Yeah.
Or use. Yeah.
Well,
and you've done a great job with the gear, Jay. Like these compare and contrast, and I love those videos you've been doing. So you've been doing a lot of good there for your consumer as well.
I appreciate it. I think I've kind of found my calling. I feel like I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. So much like you,
Awesome.
I find it a very rewarding
Yeah.
kind of endeavor. And then like the hunting community is a very grateful community. Like I know a lot of people say there's a lot of negativity. I don't know. In my world, I don't feel that. I have very little, like the little blips on the radar every now and then, but overall, I broke a fender on my quad trailer and I didn't know how I was supposed to fix it. And it was like kind of threatening my trip. And I put a post up on Instagram, and a guy who works at an auto body shop 5 minutes from my house was like, just run it down to the back door, dude. And he follows me on Instagram. We've never met before. And he fixed it in 15 minutes, wouldn't take any cash.
Awesome.
And I'm like, that shit wouldn't happen when that was social media. You know what I mean? Like, so
Yeah.
I do think there's a lot of positivity floating around out there. As long as that's kind of what
agree.
you're putting in, that's what you'll get out.
Yep. I agree 100%. It's a great community.
Yeah. All right, John, as always, thank you for your time, your experience, and your wisdom. That was fantastic. And hopefully I get a picture of an elk here from you in a few weeks.
Well, yeah, you too, man. Good luck.
All
Have
right, we'll
fun.
chat soon. Yes.
All right.
Will do. Cheers, John.
All right.